It's insanely rare when you can call something one of the best of its kind. The most striking quality to It Follows is how self-contained and personalised the story is. It's an anomaly, a seemingly random encounter, and like Hitchcock's Psycho suggests, sometimes the viewer is actually the voyeur, intruding on the life of a supposedly random individual. Now, before we go any further, let's put a few things into perspective. This analysis is just a personal theory. I don't believe I have a definitive explanation, nor do I promote the idea that such an answer actually exists. This is a film that is built around the notion of dealing with the unknown, so don't take it personally if I disagree with you or seem like I'm grasping at straws. That's what makes this a theoretical discussion. To make the video relevant to you, I have broken the video up into checkpoints, which you can jump between if you wish to pick and choose what you want to listen to. But to get the greater picture of what I mean, I recommend watching the entire video. Once you've finished, make sure to leave your thoughts, theories, and comments below, and we'll discuss any queries, concerns, or ideas that many of us probably missed. While I see the STD metaphor many people are referring to, it seems like a very rudimentary and generalized way of looking at the greater and more subtle picture, which is how the film portrays its young characters as hopelessly lost and unsure of where their lives are going. It's a coming-to-age story, one that is personal and subjective to the point of view of Jay. The film establishes a dreamlike and nightmarish quality to its style, whether it be the observational and explorative camera work, moody lighting, or the synthesizer fused with the distorted and aggressive music by Disasterpiece. So we can argue that the world is both her dream and her nightmare. Firstly, there's the lack of parental authority. Young people have such a mass appeal in horror because they have to deal with the threat alone, and rarely do adults intervene. Horror films have a hopelessness to them, in which you're all alone and trapped in an endless nightmare. And with young people especially, they can't go running, crying to their parents to shield them from the big bad world. There are adults in the film, sure, but they themselves are hopeless too, only appearing in the background as decoration or to accentuate their lack of concern for the hopeless youngsters. Also, we have the film's absence of time and space. The time period in It Follows is deliberately disjointed to give a sense of disorientation and bridging the gap between total fantasy and reality, further confirming Jay's state of mind. Nightmares appear real because of how vivid the person portrays them, and just as the nightmare seemingly ends, the credits awaken us to the fact that we don't really know how the nightmare was supposed to end. That's exactly how It Follows works. It's like when we're in the middle of a really exciting dream, and just as we get to the grand finale, our alarm awakens us and we can no longer get back into the story. Significantly, we have the character's sense of uncertainty. They appear dull, bored, and have little interesting things to do because they're at an age when they're transitioning from teenagers to the presumed adulthood, which is made clear by the constant reminders of childhood and nostalgia. They're supposed to be mature and grow wiser, so when they make careless mistakes and silly choices, it's not because of bad character development, it's because that's how real people get on. For example, in the two scenarios when they shoot a gun, they are not marksmen nor have any thought as to what they're actually doing. When Jay shoots the revolver, it's just so lucky that she hits the creature on the sixth and final bullet. Likewise, when Paul fires the gun, in two cases does he nearly kill his friends. In bad horror films, the actions of teens are usually viewed as dumb because it simply comes down to poor writing. But here, it's down to their naivety and limited awareness of how to cope with a stressful situation. They go from finding practical solutions to desperate circumstances, from attempting to actually kill the creature to hiding in their room, simply waiting and hoping for it to go away. Sexuality also plays an essential part to the film's characters. When you're younger, sex can be generalized and naively assumed to be this threshold of maturity. As a male, I've heard the gesture that having sex means you're now officially a man. It's a very socially constructed concept. This idea is directly imposed onto Paul, because he's seen as a weak guy in comparison to Greg or Hugh, who are much older men both physically and metaphorically, such as this obsession with glorifying their car. Yara even jests that her book called The Idiot is about Paul, a story about a young prince with a positive and peaceful nature who is rebuked for his naivete. The prince struggles with his awkward personality and affection for the ones he loves, in a world obsessed with greed and sexual activity, It's his purity and selflessness that perceives him as an idiot because the real world is actually quite harsh and selfish. Greg and Hugh are in it for their own selfish gain, whereas Paul is the only male character with genuine care and compassion. And yes, we'll come back to this. Furthermore, it's worth considering the poem read by the high school teacher called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. It's a story about isolation, incapability for decisive action, sexual tension, emasculation, and the awareness of morality, which actually mirrors the events and themes of the film. Writers McCoy and Harlan analysed the poem as about frustration and the impotence of the everyday person, and how it represents thwarted desires and modern disillusionment. This is important because of how Jay is portrayed. She is going through an unsure phase in her life, in which she simply doesn't know what the future holds, and the excitement you get with growing up is completely gone. The way she ponders to herself in the pool mirrors the scene from The Graduate where Benjamin sits alone under the pool, having been smothered by the world and unsure of what the future holds. Even both films echo the same kind of ending. Overall, It Follows focuses heavily on this burden of growing up, and the uncertainty that comes with aging. The characters don't exactly know what to do with themselves, nor do they feel their desires are being fulfilled, and all while trying to accept the imminent threat that death is eventually inevitable. A lot of what I'm going to say comes down to how you interpret mythology. It's not the devil because the devil is a trickster. He doesn't play by the rules, and if so, why wouldn't the creature attempt to trick Jay by hiding around a corner and jumping out when she least expects it? The speculation that it's death itself is a lot more down to your philosophical judgment. For example, the themes of the film point towards the fact that death is inevitable and it's something you can never get rid of. That said, there is the belief that the Grim Reaper is simply an escort that departs your soul from the body, which seems to be what happens to Greg. This theory will consider the creature as a demon, and not simply because the creature burns its victims. The key argument is that demons have to be invited by the victim, and the film makes a point to highlight that all cases of passing on the curse were purely consensual. At no point is the creature forced upon anyone. The film has no elements of rape or sexual assault, bar when the creature actually kills its victims. It seems plausible that the creature can't be passed on by force. It literally has to be agreed upon, such as prostitution, one-night stands, or more significantly, being in a relationship. I think that the point of having a physical relationship is because that is potentially how you get rid of it. The fact is that it's passed on through deception, one-night stands, prostitution, or dishonest relationships. No cases have ever pointed towards true love. That's why when Jay passes it on to Paul, it can be seen as love prevailing and defeating evil. I'll come back to this because it proves significant to the film's conclusion. It pays no attention to anything else other than the current carrier, but when Paul attempts to intervene, he is knocked back at a natural force, confirming it's a physical presence and can interact with the real world. But here's the catch. It's possible that it can only interact with those who carry the curse or those who believe. Paul trusts everything that Jay says, so his assault is expected, whereas when the creature attempts to get into Jay's room, because it's stuck behind Yara who doesn't believe it exists, it can't disturb or attempt to overtake her. It's only when Yara and Kelly start to see electrical equipment fly about or Jay's hair lift do they start to believe, as confirmed by seeing it from their perspective. When the creature transforms, it's never indicated how it decides its form. However, notice that many of its choices are nude people, prostitutes, and people in bed clothing. It's possible that a lot of these people are likely previous victims who were caught during inappropriate times. Even Annie is one of the forms despite not wearing the clothes she died in. There is a visual point to be made about the white overalls that many forms wear. The creature walks like a somnambulist, or in other words, a sleepwalker. The early German expressionist horror film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari had a somnambulist called Caesar, who committed murders with many of victims being asleep at the time. It's one of the many ways to catch someone off guard. You're at your most vulnerable when you're asleep. I'm genuinely going out on a limb here, but the film makes constant references to the feeling of always being watched. Stalking and voyeurism are prevalent throughout, such as the boys that watch Jay, the distant zooms of the camera, and even small moments like the person that watches Jay and her friends inspecting Hugh's house. At times, it's curious how the creature is able to take on the forms of certain people, like Jay's father or the young boy, without ever having seen them. If we were to say that it can see through the eyes of others, or at least in some way see the victim, Hugh's house reinforces this because the windows are completely covered with newspaper. Why would he need to cover the windows if the creature already knows where he is? Potentially, Hugh was trying to throw it off his metaphorical scent. This is accentuated when Jay looks through the peephole in the newspaper to see another nosy individual look at the house. There may only be one creature, as Hugh confirms, but suggestions of underlings or watchers following those involved is worth considering. It's even plausible for the creature to be clairvoyant, and as we'll come to see, foreshadowing is quite common within the film. For example, when the creature turns into the young boy who appears in pre-1960s clothing, there is no feasible way the creature could know that boy watches Jay. Considering we see him again before the creature appears on the roof, that very same roof that the young boy was originally on when spying on Jay, it insinuates that the creature is gaining information, presumably attempting to go through the window rather than through the door that was barricaded shut. The idea behind this setup is that the characters attempt to kill the creature by luring it into the water, then electrocuting it. We already know it can't be killed, but as David Robert Mitchell and the themes of the film suggest, they're just kids who are going to desperate measures without practical solutions. The creature responds by taking on the form of her father in an attempt to emotionally torment her, suggesting that it knew it was a trap. But that's not the only reason it doesn't get in the water. But it's the fact that Jay is actually safe in the water. Whether water is the creature's natural weakness is never told, considering the film makes frequent references to liquids such as the beaches, lakes, swimming pools, rain, soft drinks, and the one urinating prostitute. There has to be a reason it points that out to us. We can also link this to the idea of inviting the demon. When the creature breaks into Greg's house forcefully, it knocks on his bedroom door instead of barging in. Again, possibly because Greg has to invite it into his room. It's like if the location was blessed so the curse has no effect. Jay's swimming pool is likely just as safe as Greg in his car. It's like their own versions of a talisman, something that provides good luck from evil or harm because it means something to them in the same way a cross is commonly used against demons. When we see the creature's blood cover the pool, the intensifying music, the slow dramatic zoom, and the shot cutting to the chair blocking the door insinuates that something has clearly happened. In my suspicion, I believe it shows its true original form, which is something far more haunting, enough to drive Jay to immediately want to pass it on to Paul. The fact that she hesitates giving it to him and not wanting him to come into harm's way is completely overthrown immediately after we see the blood in the pool. The general question many are wondering is that it following in the background. It seems like an obvious conclusion, but optimistically, it's possible to suspect the figure behind them is not looking directly at them. Yet, here's the bleaker way of looking at it. I've always felt there's this looming sense of red that permeates in nearly every scene, that insinuates that it's coming. Annie has red shoes, her father comes out in a red shirt, and the taillights in the car are prominent. When Hugh takes Jay to the movie theatre, he wears a red shirt, the theatre is red, and the lady in the diner is in red as the camera zooms into a man walking in the distance. Once Hugh passes it on, red follows Jay constantly, especially considering her red nail varnish. Taking this into account, you will start to notice that red travels around quite frequently, even in subtle instances. Some people will assume this is a bit arbitrary, because you can say the same thing about every colour, but the art direction is quite deliberate. Red, blue, green and pink are distinctly used throughout the film. In my theory, red is the signal of it coming, as it links to the idea of foreshadowing and clairvoyance of the creature. In the last moments of the couple walking down the street, that man raking the leaves is wearing red. Looks like it's still coming, but not necessarily the person behind them. Before I said that the curse was passed on through dishonesty and deception, whereas Paul's love is genuine. I believe that if their relationship was pure, that would stop the creature. But here's the bad news. Their relationship simply doesn't work. We already know that Jay doesn't feel the same way about Paul, and passing it on was purely another attempt to buy herself some time, so their intercourse was dishonest. Look at the way they hold hands as they walk down the street. They look straight-faced and uncertain like in The Graduate. Paul clutches her hand tightly, but the way she moves her fingers suggests she isn't comfortable with it, and their absence of dialogue suggests that their relationship is just as hollow as Hugh and Greg. Paul is essentially just another carrier. He might care for Jay in the same way that Jay cared for Hugh, but the role has been reversed. Nothing has changed, and ultimately the nightmare continues. The film ends with an empty void to infer to the absence of uncertainty that the characters hold. Their quest feels meaningless, their lives feel directionless, and like I said at the start, the entire world just seems hopeless.